Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for 2018 Fortune 500 Candidate Experience Audit Insights, the importance of candidate conversion, sponsored by Talemetry and presented by Carrie Gillum and Pete Sanitas. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and SHRM credits. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. If you have any questions today during the webcast, click the Q&A tab on your Zoom control panel and type them in there. We'll be sure to follow up with you. A new tab will be opening up in a browser window that will contain the webcast survey. Please make sure to complete it as soon as the webcast is ended. I'm also going to be posting a link to that survey in the chat, so if you want to make sure that you actually do get that survey, please copy that link. I'll also be posting a link to the slides there in the chat if you wish to download those. And it's my pleasure now to turn you over to today's presenters.
Great, thank you, Sylvie. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Joining us. My name is Pete Sanitas. Pete has over 15 years of sales and sales leadership success in the media and technology industries. Having spent the last decade in the recruitment marketing arena, Pete leads the Talemetry enterprise sales teams in crafting solutions for new customers in North America and globally. He's passionate about bringing modern marketing best practices and efficiency to the corporate recruiting world. And it was under Pete's leadership that our telemetry research team completed this Fortune 500 audit. So our telemetry research team audited all 500 of the Fortune 500 career sites to better understand why typical application rates are so low. And we're excited to share some of the results with you today. Some of the things we'll cover are why the conversion is so important. What are some common types of candidate conversion? It's more than just a completed application. Some of the observations that we made in our audit, and then some quick tips on how to improve your conversion rates. So to start with, Pete, thanks for joining us and sharing the results with us today. Maybe you can share a little bit with our audience on why recruiting gets harder, seems to get harder every year for recruiters. I know even this morning, I think I was reading the unemployment rate is down to like 3.7%, and it's the lowest it's been in some key states like New York and California and Texas. So it certainly makes the job of recruiters more and more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely, Carrie, and welcome everybody. Thanks for your time here today. Universally, the recruiting challenge is that there's not enough qualified candidates applying to the right jobs at the right time. And you hit on a big part of it right there with the current unemployment rates here in the United States and North America and even the majority of the globe with the lowest unemployment rates in nearly 50 years and continuing to be around 3.7% here over the last quarter or so. The pure economic supply and demand are driving a big impact there. But in a bigger macro view of supply and demand and what's happening in the workforce, we also have a situation here where as we enter into the next decade and into the 2020s, millennials will be the largest generation in the workforce, and it's really impacting the availability of skill sets, the availability of experience, succession planning, and ultimately that universal recruiting challenge of just not enough qualified candidates applying to the right jobs at the right time.
That's great. Thanks, Pete. Maybe if you can share a little bit, I know recruitment marketing can mean a lot of different things to different people. Can you maybe share a little bit about these different channels of recruitment marketing and how the candidate experience can be impacted in each one of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, here at Talemetry, to try and help simplify what can be a very complex world and a lot of different definitions of what is recruitment marketing, we've gone about establishing and defining exactly what recruitment marketing is, particularly to the large enterprise environments that are recruiting at scale with the Evolve Maturity and Efficiency Framework. And the framework is a maturity model. It is an efficiency map, as you kind of see there on the bottom half of the screen, of really how the recruitment marketing processes should be interrelated and how they should really help optimize from a recruiter and organizational perspective. But defining what is recruitment marketing across these 6 process areas is really important, and really important to the context of our audit and the conversation here today. So, recruitment marketing, from the most simplest sense is the inbound marketing. So those things that you're doing to attract candidates that you don't know today, that's traditionally done through job advertisements, posting to traditional job boards, programmatic, aggregators, the rest. There's the 3 process areas that in tandem make up really effective candidate relationship management, or proactive recruiting, or as we call it, outbound marketing, which is sourcing new talent to build up a targeted list of people that you then want to send a message to or a campaign to. And the relationship management aspects of that, of being able to take talent you already know, talent that you just sourced, talent that's applied to your jobs, talent that's interacted with your recruiters virtually or in person, and build singular views of those individuals so that you can really build targeted lists to do that outbound marketing to. And then the candidate experience, which we've defined as candidate engagement. The majority of that is, the experience, the candidate journey with your career site and your digital properties, but also the emerging elements like chatbots or just recruiter to candidate pre-applicant interaction, all fits within candidate engagement. And ultimately, whether it's the inbound efforts and the advertisement spend, the proactive recruiting efforts with the direct sourcing, third-party sourcing, and outbound marketing, relationship management, all of that, driving through that candidate experience, all of it comes down to the ability to convert to outcomes. And conversion, the ultimate conversion being the application, and some of those secondary conversions, meaning, did I gain, identification of candidates? So I know who some of our interested candidates are, our talent network opt-ins, our job alerts, and items of those nature. So ultimately, recruitment marketing and recruitment marketing optimization, that evolution and efficiency map that we just described there within the Evolve model, it's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, organizations in North America are contributing to $160 billion in annual recruitment spend. Compounding that is, when that spend isn't effective, when it doesn't produce outcomes, there's another $160 billion in annual economic loss just from vacancies. And in the middle sits that opportunity of recruitment marketing optimization, which drives a lower cost per hire and a shorter time to fill in self-identified instances.
And how does that break down, Pete? There's a tremendous amount of money being spent, and so many companies I know that we see who aren't getting their return on investment there, and a lot of pressure from CFOs, right? So how does that break down really from a conversion perspective?
Yeah, so I kind of hit on it already, but whether it's it's 200 billion spent worldwide, so whether that's on the inbound or the outbound, driving into that candidate engagement, trying to get those interested parties to apply to jobs, ultimately it all comes down to, the application that's required for recruiters to really start evaluating individual applicants against requisitions for fit and selection, and ultimately making the hire. And another way to look at it, or a big observation here, is that conversion from reading a job description and saying, yep, that's me, I have the skills, and this is the right next step for me, the employer brand matches what I value as an individual, I would like to apply now. That failure rate from clicking apply now to actually being a completed compliant applicant that a recruiter can interact with back in the ATS tends to be a 70 to 90% failure rate in enterprise organizations. And if we put that another way, 70 cents on every dollar invested on the front end of the recruitment marketing efforts is basically goes up in flames and results in $60 billion worth of actual value making it into the ATS out of the 200 billion spent on recruitment marketing activities. So, it is the biggest singular opportunity organizations have to have an immediate impact, substantial impact in their recruitment results, in the number of qualified candidates that recruiters can interact with every day. And yet it's one that continues to linger and fester kind of within the Fortune 500 world, as we'll cover here in a bit here in our findings.
What was that percentage rate, Pete, on the failure rate that you mentioned?
Failure rate typically somewhere between 70 and 90%. Put in other words, conversion, in the 10 to 30% in many enterprise organizations.
Wow. So what are some of the specific areas, Pete, that the research team audited in this audit that your team found?
Yeah, so we audited the same things that as individual consumers we expect with the brands that we interact with, whether those are B2B brands or B2C brands. Our expectations as consumers here heading into the year 2019 are pretty radically different than they were just a decade ago. First of all, we're all probably sitting next to at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 connected devices. Heck, you're probably wearing one on your wrist, or might be wearing one on your wrist. We're always connected. And that's a big part of all of this. But in the modern mobile app-based world, we expect logins to be optional. When we go to purchase something from a vendor online that we've never worked with before, we either expect our phone, our device to remember all of our mailing and credit card information for us, or as much of it as possible, or we expect that vendor site to not require us to create a username and password or an account, but to be able to check out as a guest. So we're conditioned for login being optional. When we're interested in events, when we're thinking about doing something socially, we expect to be able to share that with other people that we like. We expect to be able to express interest, and we expect to even get reminders about that type of interest and conversion. Not only do we expect logins to be optional, but we expect to be able to have a very frictionless process when we go to convert. And in our consumer lives, that's going to be able to, going to purchase something. Amazon certainly has trained us, all of us with a Prime membership, to be able to purchase very, very quickly, as few clicks as possible. And related to that, we expect to be able to opt into content or to offers. And when we opt in to a mailing list, to a customer discount or savings program, we actually expect to receive those offers. So, as consumers, we understand and we have this expectation that we should be able to opt in to additional value and build a relationship with a brand. So those same consumer expectations are what we looked for within the modern enterprise conversion process. So we looked at applications, the ultimate desire, the ultimate desire or goal of your recruitment marketing activities. We looked at the opt-in opportunities, kind of that, hey, we'd like to opt in for additional remarketing of talent networks and job alerts. And we did look at job related career event or university recruiting registration capability. Again, the ability to opt in or digitally subscribe to and express interest in events.
So what did you find, Peter? There's some high-level themes of what went wrong in these conversion processes, not just with the applications, but the other ways to convert?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're here in front of us on the screen, but, way too many times where we distract a candidate, where we add unnecessary steps and make the application process more of a data entry test, or multiple layers of data entry hoops to jump through, as opposed to being able to truly do what they're attempting to do, candidates are attempting to do, which is express interest and demonstrate their qualifications to the requirements as quickly as possible, so that they can start interacting with the recruiter and evaluating their fit to the opportunity. And certainly that changes from requisition to requisition, or from talent audience to talent audience. But when we look back at the universal recruiting challenge of not getting enough of the right people to apply to the right jobs, what we're often talking about, particularly in today's economy, is highly sought after, employed candidates with unique skill sets that are very important to our organization as the hiring organization, but also very important to competitors. And, without really, sweating the details and without having consideration for the candidates, because we don't want to change, or we're not looking for better ways to serve them from a consumer perspective, we're not putting ourselves in a good position to address that universal challenge head on.
Mm-hmm. So can you maybe share with us the specific parts of the audit that the team looked at and measured each of the organizations on?
Absolutely. So we looked at, what is the biggest one? The old apply now stop sign instead of the apply now green light. And that is a registration requirement. We'll dig into that in more detail here in a second. After a registration, we looked at whether or not it truly was a data entry exercise. And this has an impact on any type of device user, but I think we might have just heard one of my mobile devices ring right there. If we're talking about a mobile device, data entry on a mobile device of 50 or 100 fields is a lot more cumbersome than a traditional desktop arrangement. So how are we accommodating those candidates and all candidates with social profile and cloud storage-based solutions in the application process? We did look at the campus and event registration opportunities and really how are we converting that specialized strategic audience. We looked at two elements of opt-in, so the talent networks, the job alerts. And then in 2018, we looked at a couple of the biggest sources of organic traffic, Google for Jobs, which is relatively new to the scene here in the last year and a half or so, and Indeed. And we looked at candidate conversion and the candidate journey across the Fortune 500 for both of those, very important sources in the overall application volume. When we look at the registration requirement, again, I've emphasized that this is probably the most important aspect of recruitment marketing conversion. We found in 2017 and again in 2018 that 90% of the Fortune 500 candidate experiences or career sites are requiring candidates to create a registration or log into an account as a portion of their application process, and the majority of the time, vast majority of the time, is the very first step in the application. These password requirements, you see an example there of a Workday environment. They often have some challenging password requirements. Usually you don't get a heads up on what those requirements are for a password until after you've failed to do it properly the first time. And again, you've got to have some consumer lens or reflect on this as if it were us as individuals. What is that experience like, and what's the frustration there? So 90% require it, and yet that requirement of apply now equaling creating an account with some sort of cumbersome password results in 50% application drop off right there at that point in the process. Step number one of the conversion process with a registration is going to be about 50% drop off right there. Can't do many things in recruitment marketing to double your outcome. You can absolutely change your registration requirement as a first step and see a very immediate and large impact in the number of qualified candidates that your recruiters get to interact with.
Pete, I know in talking with a lot of our customers in different organizations, a lot of them say that, well, the software requires that registration. Can you maybe talk to that a little bit?
Yes. So absolutely. A lot of what we're looking at here related to these elements come back to the technology that's currently providing that capability. And in most of the Fortune 500, we're talking about a large enterprise applicant tracking system. And the applicant tracking system itself wasn't built to be a recruitment marketing tool in most cases. The large enterprise applicant tracking systems are part of a bigger HCM solution and are intended to capture all of the information as early as possible in a secure fashion for a eventual employee. but that is not contemplating the considerations of people that are expressing interest in high demand skill sets and occupations early in the recruitment interaction process. And I think it really comes back to what was the technology built for, and how are you trying to apply it, and certainly exhausting the options out there in the marketplace as to what technologies can allow us to receive a completed compliant application, but not at the sake of a poor candidate experience.
Right, at that 50% drop off.
So, speaking of, at the sake of a poor candidate experience, back to the data entry aspect. So, are you hiring for data entry skills, or are you hiring for some highly specialized skill set or in-demand skill set with a lot of competition? And so when we look at things like social profile apply, are you giving candidates the opportunity to start filling in all of those required data fields with the information that's already on their LinkedIn profile, their Indeed profile? Well, thankfully, this is a spot where the enterprise ATS offerings and the technologies used by the Fortune 500 in a application process are kind of coming on board, and 71% or so are enabling the use of a social profile. But there's still 30% of the Fortune 500 out there that don't let a candidate start filling in those fields with something as commonplace as a LinkedIn profile. Similarly, one of the big challenges that we've seen, related to the data that prospects or customers have, or from other research, such as the Talent Board Candy candidate experience report, show that candidates just aren't applying to jobs with mobile devices at nearly the rate that they're conducting their job search on mobile devices. And most organizations at least have a mobile accessible career site and application process, meaning that it will render on a mobile device. There's a big difference, though, between rendering on a device and actually being considerate of the person using that device. And cloud storage is one of those considerations, that the technologies that are out there, the experiences that are being put forth by the Fortune 500 aren't allowing and aren't considering the fact that candidates have their most recent version of their resume, particularly younger generations of talent, like we just talked about with millennials being the largest generation in the workforce in just a year from now, that they're accustomed to having all of their files in the cloud. Local storage, what is that? And so accommodation of cloud-based storage for uploading a resume and parsing it out is really important, and yet 72% plus of the Fortune 500 aren't accommodating the candidate in that fashion. It's a really big miss, and it's one that can have a big impact on a large portion of the candidates that are experiencing your career site and your application process today that are using devices of any type.
And what about events? How does that come into play, whether it's on campus or other job-related events in the conversion process?
Yeah, so, 2/3 plus of the Fortune 500 have content on their career site related to campus recruiting or event recruiting. And yet only 6% of the Fortune 500 actually has a good call to action for expressing interest in attending those events. Most of the Fortune 500 have dedicated university relation recruiting programs. The average URR budget in enterprise in 2016 was over $500,000. So think about this: really big budgets, a high priority strategic initiative for businesses. They've got the content on the website, and yet if a candidate, say I'm a soon-to-be graduate of a much sought-after degree, and I'm on your corporate career site reading about your opportunities in your management training program or whatever it might be, but there's no place for me to raise my hand and say, yeah, I'm interested in that, you got a big miss. And that's what we see out there across the Fortune 500. If you're on campus, with recruiters or employees out there trying to identify the best talent that's going to be part of your next generation of your workforce, and you're not giving those candidates an opportunity to submit their resume or express their interest digitally right there on a talent network or a registration form supporting that event, you're missing a huge opportunity. Now you're going to have a tool or technologies and processes in the back end to do something with that. But typically giving a candidate who's gotten that far into your digital journey an option to express interest and opt in to future communications is going to pay off very well. And yet it's a big miss by the majority of the Fortune 500.
Well, sounds like a big disconnect. How about both know the opt-in talent networks as well as job alerts? How do those come into play?
Yeah, so for talent networks, our year-over-year findings here were kind of a tale of two different scenarios. The first is we actually saw less talent networks overall out there in the Fortune 500 candidate experience than the year prior. So, all we can do is hypothesize based upon the interactions we've had and what we've seen. But what we've seen here is that organizations have had talent networks or places for candidates to opt in that weren't necessarily powered by the right level of technology behind it for true relationship management or for marketing and marketing automation back out to those candidates. So it just became another black hole. And I think that's why we've seen a slight uptick, 1 or 2 percentage points of organizations not having a talent network at all. But on the positive front, we've actually seen an increase in the number of optional talent networks at the sake of the forced talent network. And that's a really good thing. A forced talent network essentially would say that a candidate who clicks apply now on a job description is first met not by the application itself, but by a short form that kind of looks like an application, might even be entirely confusing the candidate thinking that they're on the application, which is then immediately preceded by the actual application, which is, entering the exact same information in again, your name again, your email address again, potentially uploading a resume again. This is a really disruptive, kind of outdated approach to the process. It's one that can have a negative impact on some of your organic sources, such as Indeed distribution. In a modern world, here headed into the next decade and kind of having that 2020 vision, your technology stack should allow you to have any person who's entered into your application process express consent to be remarketed to in the future. Ergo, they're in your talent network. And then on every job, on every page of your career site, you should be explicitly offering candidates who aren't self-identifying with your available opportunities, either the one they're looking at right now or the everything that they've looked through on your site. They should have the opportunity to express interest in general to your employment brand as an alternative call to action. And those opt-ins truly should be opt-in as opposed to forced to the process. And we did see forced talent networks decline from 12% of the market down to 7% of the market year over year. So that's a really good thing from the candidate perspective in our 2018 findings. Job alerts, not a whole lot of change in the world of job alerts. When done right, job alerts, add a lot of value to the process, right? It's that opt-in. I think of it as, yes, I would like to receive future discounts, from your store. Job alerts are very much the same thing. Yes, I'd like to receive ongoing communication about jobs that I might be a fit for. The best job alert systems have a high level of intelligence in that, in being able to send the right types of jobs to the right candidates, back to the universal challenge and addressing it head on. Unfortunately, while 61% of the Fortune 500 do use job alerts, most of those are buried as part of the functionality of the ATS. Most of those lack any kind of real meaningful configuration by the candidate or really advanced ability to match the jobs to those candidate communications at an effective rate. And again, in the enterprise space, in the Fortune 500 space, most of those job alerts that are powered by the ATS themselves are buried behind the username and password registration. So it goes right back to that very first step, that very few candidates get exposed to those job alerts.
So can you walk us through, Pete, what does an optimized process look like, and what, kind of what the results could be if it was optimized?
Yeah, I think Fortune 500 company CDW has a really good example of what an optimized candidate conversion process looks like. You could look at it here on the screen, or if you want to take a look at it offline here, anybody, it's cdwjobs.com. But what you'll see in the CDW experience is when a candidate clicks apply on that job description, instead of being met by a Taleo enterprise username and password or login screen, they're met by, hey, let's understand your first name, your last name, your email address, no username and password, and click next. Immediately after that, how would you like to have us help you fill out this application form? Do you want to start with your LinkedIn profile? Do you want to start with a Google profile, an Indeed profile? Do you want to upload it from cloud storage? And these are screenshots here, but if you were to actually go do this on your mobile device, you'll see these render very well in a phone format, in a smartphone format. There's some accommodations there, such as, hey, I'm halfway through it, I'd like to continue later, and having the option to go ahead and return right to that step off of an email link or a text link. Here in the previous screen, having the job description visible on any page instead of having to click back into the previous job description page as a candidate's filling out the various required fields. All of these accommodations to really optimize the application process. Again, parse all of that out to the candidate, give them a chance to validate it, or in certain positions where you don't really need them to validate their work history or their education history, skip that entirely. Obviously, Fortune 500 enterprise organizations, there are going to be compliance requirements and self-identification requirements. Accommodating those, but in a very streamlined fashion without having a 20-step process is really important. And at the end of the day, getting that candidate through the process quickly, having that candidate available immediately in the ATS, but not having the candidate feel like they just went through a large ERP process that has very little accommodation or consideration for them, and mirroring their candidate or their consumer experiences, drives a really optimized application process. And in the case of CDW, they're seeing an 83% application completion percentage from the candidates who click apply now on that job description to being completed applicants in the ATS that recruiters can interact with. I think most of the folks on this line, if you're in a large enterprise organization, probably aware if you got a registration requirement and are failing to meet some of these accommodations or considerations, you're probably in that 20 to 30% application completion rate. If you even have that metric available to you, I think that's another one of the common things that we see. Some of the major ATS providers out there don't actually start measuring application completion percentages until after the candidate has logged into the process. It's a bit of a sleight of hand there. And use of tools like Google Analytics on each of the pages can help get you to a better, accurate view of what that drop-off story actually looks like.
Pete, it reminds me too, we did a webinar a couple of weeks ago with CME, and he shared some of the changes that they've been able to make to their application process, because they were in a situation where if you didn't complete the application right then and there, when you walked away, you just lost everything that you did. So they were able to change their process and increase their conversion rates tremendously also.
Yeah, so whether we're talking about CDW with a Taleo Enterprise or a CME group with a Workday environment, I think the enterprise challenges kind of are universally consistent, and yet the common sense, consumer-focused approach is usually going to be the one that wins out and provides a positive candidate experience.
So, and I think, Indeed, the Indeed story is really fascinating to look at, right? Because as we see with so many of our clients, Indeed is their number one source of candidates. But the reality is that they're losing so many of them, right, because of the conversion process, because of the complexity of it. So maybe you can share a little bit here about what your team found with the Indeed process and how to simplify and streamline that application process.
Yeah, absolutely. So, essentially, when it comes to Indeed and large enterprise employers such as the Fortune 500, there are kind of three different paths that can happen. Organizations, most Fortune 500 organizations are not using the ATS, out of the box career site, which just has job search and results functionality, but have built a strong employer brand, a true career site with a lot of content, dynamic content, personalization, and trying to drive for a really positive candidate experience. So, we kind of put that here over in the purple area of a branded career site with content and job descriptions through to an ATS application process. The alternative to that is, and most of those organizations that have those also still have in the background, ATS job descriptions kind of out of sight, out of mind. Well, unfortunately, what we found was that almost 40% of the Fortune 500 has the linkage from the Indeed job description. When a candidate clicks apply on company site, it's actually going to the ATS job description. And so a candidate that gets into that ATS job description is very unlikely to experience any of that content and that branded journey and all of the consideration and effort that's been put into that improved career site. They are in that, kind of look at it, instead of being in the Technicolor world, they are at the beginning of the process in a black and white world, and really struggling there to get to your quality content. So big miss for many organizations who have an improved career experience to not be able to, really take advantage of that effort they've put in with their number one source of job board traffic. There's a new option out there from Indeed and some of their partners, including Talemetry, that leverages the Indeed apply and offers the absolute easiest conversion path for the candidate to actually use that Indeed profile and never leave the Indeed experience, but still be a completed applicant with all of the required screening questions and self-identification information from that ATS application workflow, but not having to leave Indeed and ultimately driving that candidate into the ATS. So, there's about 5% of the Fortune 500 using a solution like that. It is a relatively new solution. I think if you've got an improved career site, it'd be worth your while to go to Indeed and see what the experience looks like and make sure that that traffic is hitting your improved site as opposed to the ATS experience as a first step, and then look for ways to leverage that Indeed apply in a compliant fashion here in the years ahead.
Right. So the other big factor that impacted our industry last year, of course, was Google for Jobs. So what did the team find as it relates to Google for Jobs and the impact to conversion?
Yeah, I think it's interesting when we talk about Indeed or Google for Jobs, in that which it's chicken or egg scenario, which is it? But there's a career builder study from not too long ago that identified that 73% of all job seekers said they started their job search on Google. And with that kind of volume of origin of the active candidate experience, it's really important that organizations contemplate, understand how their jobs are getting indexed on Google for Jobs, and again, trying to make sure that that's a controlled of experience that leverages the investment that's being put into the best candidate experience, the improved career site, the rest, as much as possible. And unfortunately, that's just not what we're seeing here in the early iterations of Google for Jobs. We found that for over 46% of the Fortune 500 didn't have consistent direct indexing of their jobs onto Google for Jobs. So their jobs are on Google for Jobs in most cases, but their jobs are not directly linked back to their career site. They're linked to third-party job boards who may or may not have an official relationship with those brands. And every one of those, linkages, every one of those connections from site A to site B results in significant drop-off. And each one, after each successive one, increases the dissatisfaction of the candidate experience well before they even get to click apply now. We saw yet 20% are pushing those jobs back to an ATS job description, when far less than 20% of the Fortune 500 is using an ATS job description as its best candidate experience, and only 35% are doing the optimal, which is driving them to that improved candidate experience. So big opportunity for a large portion of the Fortune 500 to provide a better experience, gain more control with better technology, and execution on their career sites, so that Google for Jobs is indexing it appropriately.
So at a high level, what are some of the changes that we saw from 2018 compared to 2017?
Yeah, so we saw a slight uptick in the percentage of organizations in the Fortune 500 that were demonstrating best practices. Still very, a very small portion of the Fortune 500 that falls into that category. Saw a larger uptick to those that moved out of, some of the poor levels of candidate conversion into that area for opportunity for improvement and on the cusp of demonstrating the best practices. Slight decline in poor performance, and that's really where the uptick it was for the demonstrating best practices or opportunity for improvement. And yet we're still seeing almost 50% of the Fortune 500 fall at a level of failing best practices. And really what we're saying there is they have half of the candidate experience consideration or less of those that are at opportunity for improvement or better. So the divide between these 25 companies out of the Fortune 500 and these 250 is very great. These folks are living that recruitment optimization, vision. They're feeling the significant positive impact of achieving much better conversion results day in and day out from all of their talent acquisition professionals. And I think with some of these, it's more about back to the why it's time to really think about the fact that we are all consumers first. We all have a set of expectations, and the processes that we're putting these candidates through just does not match the expectations that we have as individuals.
We can all blame Amazon and Netflix for our expectations as consumers today, right? So how, what always shocks me is that that's the Fortune 500. So, what that means to the rest of the world as well. But so how can companies begin to look at their conversion process? How do I begin to change and improve it?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of information related to this in general, related to recruitment marketing on our website at telemetry.com/evolve, which will bring you into that recruitment marketing maturity framework. All of it, whether we're talking about conversion or any of the other process areas, starts with prioritizing your audiences. We'll get into what that actually means here in a second. But once you've prioritized your audiences, put yourself in the shoes of one of your candidates against that audience. Review the current candidate journey and what the conversion process actually like. Look at your metrics. Look at your ATS metrics. Look at your career site metrics. If your job board partners and media partners are providing tags so that they can try and help you recognize the value that they're providing, look at all of those analytics and see how they compare to the experience you just had. And then start by optimizing the process at the end and work your way back to the beginning. So prioritizing your audiences. Where does your organization have the greatest need for more qualified applicants? It's the easiest way to do this. So that's either going to be by what we call key talent areas, which are job functions, families, geographical considerations, high volume, whatever that might be. However, you're going to group together, cluster together the types of talent that you're looking for from a skill set, functional, geographical perspective, key talent areas. Then you have audiences that are more strategic in nature. We are in need and have a prioritized view on, say, diversity or women in technology as a sub-diversity element, or university recruiting and campus like we talked about earlier, or veteran, executive, contingent, all examples of strategic audiences. And again, which of these are you prioritizing? Which are you in the most need of more qualified applicants, short-term or long-term? And finally, relationship-based. So what are your prioritized audience in terms of internal employees and mobility and your employee referrals, your alumni, your past applicants? Once you've identified which audiences are most important to your organization now and or long-term, start to review the candidate experience from each one of those audience perspectives. So what does it look like for a candidate who's in, let's say, your campus recruiting targeted audience? What's it look like for them to go through an application process, or to opt into a talent network, or sign into a job alert, or register for those events? On the application side, like we've talked about for the last 45 minutes, are we requiring passwords there? Are we accommodating with social and cloud upload instead of making it a data entry exercise? What is the overall time and effort? You know, a big part of what we talked about today had no contemplation whatsoever about how many questions you're asking them. Obviously, that's a big piece of it as well. But what is that overall time and effort investment for that candidate, for that audience? And are you accommodating and doing it differently for that audience? Same thing on talent networks. Are you asking for meaningful information? Are you asking for way too much information? Is that talent network something that you're forcing people to join and redundantly forcing them to join because you know your application process is so bad you want to capture them first? Are you including that call to action on every page that audience should be engaging with on the digital side? Job alerts, again, is it different than your talent networks? We see a lot of instances where the talent network and the job alert are the same thing. Best practice, they shouldn't be the same thing. Job alerts are automatic, distribution at a scheduled frequency of jobs that could be a good fit for me. A talent network, could be a whole lot more than that, and should be a whole lot more than that. It should be ongoing nurturing, content, marketing, direct recruiter outreach, and offers for specific employment. Job alerts, again, just like talent networks, they should be on every page, and they should be personalized to the search criteria or the candidate journey that candidate has had to this point. Again, by audience is important. And the same with registration, right? When you look at your experience and your conversion experience by audience, some good best practice examples to look at here to kind of compare and contrast would be OSF Healthcare here in the heartland of America, where, as a large healthcare organization, they have some specific job families and functions that they are prioritizing, such as nurses and physicians and the rest, and really provide a candidate experience that drives down, from an application, talent network, job alert perspective by each of those audiences. Kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, Port Authority, New York, New Jersey, a government entity between those two states and the federal government, has a prioritized audience related to, various talent networks and offer different talent network and conversion points there across the board. Again, another good one to look at. CDW we've already highlighted, but prioritize audiences, both of key talent areas as well as strategic audiences with campus and diversity and veteran hiring, and have different conversion elements for each of those. And, Air Canada with considerations of multilingual audiences, as well as different conversion points, whether that is, flight attendants and the, in-air staff versus those that are more operations focused. So take a look at some of those best practice examples all the way through the application process, through the job alerts, through the talent networks, and you'll get a good feel of how different organizations are accommodating different audiences with these best practices. So we've prioritized our audiences. We've gone and put ourselves in the shoes of candidates by those different audiences that we've prioritized. Now it's time to look at the metrics. So what types of metrics should you be looking at? Number one, are you simply able to measure the drop-off through that journey? If you can't, again, tools like Google Analytics can help get you there, or get you better visibility than maybe just your ATS can. What you're really looking for when it comes to the apply drop-off is what is the application drop-off in each step from the candidates who start. And a start is clicking apply now on your primary job description, and those that reach the confirmation page, the thank you page, or ultimately are applicants in the ATS that your recruiters can start to assess and select against specific requisition in a compliant process. What does it look like related to your talent networks and your job alerts, your opt-in conversion points? Are those pools, are those subscribers, are they ever increasing? Is there consistent growth in those populations, or are they stagnant? Absolutely something to look at. And then, are you able to measure the impact of those opt-in CTAs of your talent networks, of your job alerts, as the impact back into future applications and future hires? And if you have those analytics, what do they look like? And are they improving over time? Are they consistent over time? Are they declining? These are really the key metrics that, number one, you need to evaluate. Can I answer them? What is the definition of the metrics I have available to me? And then what are the trends? And then the last piece of all of it, as you go to refine or optimize, is start at the end. What is the application process and the accommodation to the best practices that we highlighted here today look like in terms of conversion, both the apply, then into the opt-ins of job alerts and talent networks, but start to look at the journey even upstream from there. So what is the actual career site experience by audience prior to that application? What does it look like as I come in from a job board source or outbound marketing or direct outreach from recruiters directly? So if you want some help with all of that from a self-assessment or external view of how your organization is stacking up against these elements and against the Fortune 500, we're happy to conduct that and provide one for you. Just reach out to us on talemetry.com or raise your hand here, send us a note here after this meeting. And I think, Carrie, we're open here to some questions.
Yep. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A box. I do have a couple here. And I think that this came in early, Pete, as we were talking. How do you ensure data privacy without security? So I'm sure that's related to GDPR, which is, of course, top of mind for everybody. So maybe you can talk a little bit about security and GDPR.
Well, I think probably more of the security, because I popped up as we were talking about not requiring an account to be created to apply to a job, or the passwordless application process. And so how do you ensure that data privacy maintains when it's not behind a username and password? Well, again, typically in an application process, the bulk of the information is going to be that is already publicly available on, say, a LinkedIn profile. So let's really stop and think about what's the level of information early on in the application process. The second element there is you're going to need to use a technology. If you're not using an ATS, you're still going to need to use a technology that has secure protocols from a data transmission perspective, but that also has a really tight integration with that ATS or HCM provider that you're ultimately going to write that application into. And so, from the perspective of data privacy, it really comes down to what are the protocols in place, in that integration, and what is the experience and the trustworthiness of the providers that are collecting that information or transmitting it to your HCM systems.
Great. Another question, what's the performance improvement you've seen from improving the candidate experience conversion process?
Yeah, purely on the application side, we've seen many organizations double or triple their conversion rates by following those best practices and consumer considerations. So again, typically seeing somewhere between a 10 and 30% application completion success rate, and pre best practice implementation and post best practice implementation. I don't believe we've seen a large enterprise organization with anything less than about a 65% application completion rate over the last couple of years. So, generally looking, you're doubling or tripling, the throughput of all of your recruitment marketing efforts in terms of completion rate uplift.
Right. Another question, how can I get a copy of the full conversion report?
Yep, so the full conversion report is available on telemetry.com. And again, if you'd like our team to take a look and evaluate your actual experience versus that report, happy to do so there as well. Just reach out to us. Great.
And I think that's all the questions we have, Pete. So thanks for sharing the insights. I know that this was a big undertaking for your team, this audit, and so thanks for sharing that with our audience today.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you to the two of you, Carrie Gillum and Pete Sinitas from Talemetry, for this very informative webcast today. And thank you to our audience for joining us. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archive recording and slides will be available for up to 7 days for our free members. And if you have an HR Genius or a recertification membership, then you have unlimited access to all of our archives and upcoming webcasts. Your webcast credit will show up in your hr.com account within 2 business days, and we will also be sending an email with that information in it. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that opened in a new browser window on your computer, or click on the link that I attached to this the chat. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.